Greetings, friends. I have an interesting story that I was reading about and listening to a podcast about. I've always been interested in history of revolutions, coups, general crises, and what lead to these moments of crises in many cases. And obviously, I went to the most famous example, the French Revolution, and see how that can apply to pretty much my current country, which is the United States of America. What could happen to cause the US to go on this revolution that eventually eats its children or causes a mass amount of chaos without a central leader to bring it into an end. And it's a very interesting story because the French Revolution goes could have had a very similar ending to the English Civil War, which was a few hundred years earlier. And pretty much the French Revolution was essentially more similar to the Russian Revolution and to modern day revolutions than I feel like it was the first contemporary era style of revolution where the entire order is shifted away. They completely reimagined society and a world that once was became no more. And I think a similar thing can happen in the United States. Not in the same way. Maybe it might turn out into a different way, but perhaps it could lead to either a more fascist government or a communist government, depending on how things shake out. But I won't digress. America has always had this bourgeois culture, and I feel like a revolution in America would eventually bring an end to this glorification of bourgeois identity and either result in a focus on a more collectivist focus, either collectivist from the right wing, which is more hierarchical, or collectivism from the left wing, where it pretends not to be hierarchical, but in reality, it is hierarchical. Money has no meaning because only the commissars and the elite of the communist system come into power. So I feel like those are the two alternatives or it could potentially return to the status quo, who knows. But there's many possibilities, and pretty much what happens in revolutions is that it's outside of the control of any single individual unless they have the force of will to captivate the nation and become a new transitional feature into a new age. So, what was I talking about in the French Revolution? So, pretty much the precursor to the French Revolution, France had a bunch of debts, especially after funding the American War of Independence. And this was around the area of the Enlightenment. So people were having new fanciful ideas about self-government against the old order of eliminating the nobility, having no sense of obligation to the old feudal order, stuff like that. And essentially, the issue with that is that the French did what to the British what eventually would come for their own head. They made the colonies revolt against their king. They sent a bunch of nobles to help the American gentry revolt against the British Parliament, and there was a new system. And this kind of encouraged Enlightenment ideals all around Europe, all around the world, because this was the first time where a new form of government that is more constitutional in form came into being. Now, France was saddled with war debts, and the US wasn't going to pay back as heavily. Of course, they had no right to demand U.S. repayment of debts because, the U.S. was flat out broke at this time. And essentially, if they feel like they were assisting the British when they were really weakening their own position. So France had a bunch of wars that they fought in. For the French king was dead broke, and essentially he ended up being forced to call the Estates General, which is the three estates: the nobility, the clergy, and the commoners, to come together and find out a plan to resolve French debts. The debt of the French king. So they were trying to figure that out. Unfortunately, that debt crisis wasn't resolved, and things spun out of control really quick. Essentially, the third estate, the peasantry, as well as the bourgeois and everyone other than the nobles and the clergy, were demanding national representation, and they were demanding control over the aspects of legislation and government. At first, this was more constitutional in format, but obviously there was pushback from the nobility, and eventually it became out of anyone's control. Like the first phase of the revolution was the nobility getting power to the Estates General. But it turned out that instead of an Estates General, they had a National Assembly, and the National Assembly became the governing body of France, and the king eventually had to move from Versailles to Paris. He ended up becoming a captive of the National Assembly and the dangerous factions in the more, and had fear from both left-wing elements in the National Assembly. And essentially the king was in fear for his life, so he tried to flee, and then pretty much lost his legitimacy. They cut off his head, and then the Reign of Terror happened. So all of this showed that everything came out of control, and the spark that kicked this was fiscal irresponsibility. If the king was strong enough to reform the army, he could have prevented issues of class resentment in the army, underpaid soldiers. He could have resolved the issues if he had the army at his side, and could have defeated the mobs and all the lower class people in his country. But he had no control over the system because it was broke, and he foolishly he wasn't a good king for the time. Anyways, why I'm saying this is because essentially the French Revolution was a series of missteps by both the king, the nobility, everyone who had elite status. And a revolution occurred by a rotation of elites forcefully, because the lower gentry and the bourgeoisie couldn't get influence. They eventually cut the heads off of everyone in their way. And it was only until Napoleon came into power, and then he got defeated, and then the Bourbons came back to power, that the revolution was closed and things were relatively stable. Anyways, so I need to say things in a concise manner. The revolution got out of control of the people. The elites who were fighting didn't end up the same elites who came back to power. It was just a bloodbath, and pretty much a state breakdown can only happen if a country deliberately makes decisions, not deliberately, either deliberately or accidentally makes decisions that put it on the path to national weakness, and then humiliation, and then poverty and inefficiency and lack of stability for the common person. So because of this lack of stability, so I'm trying to apply this to America right now. America is currently in the war debt situation. Like, it's currently fighting multiple wars around the world. It has a bloated military. It's spending much. Bond yields are rising, so it's generally a dangerous time for the American government. And if the American government doesn't resolve this issue, it could be sowing the seeds for a fiscal crisis, especially if it doesn't respond correctly to the next inevitable recession. And if it can't respond because it's broke, or if it can't respond without causing so much pain to the populace that there's popular discontent, it's going to have deep issues, very deep issues, and it could potentially sow the seeds of, if not revolution, creeping authoritarianism, or higher taxes, which would cause more resentment. So it's starting to come to a point where it can't easily solve its problems without angering a large amount of people. Especially if it cuts benefits like welfare, social security, even though it may be necessary, it's gonna cause a bunch of issues. So the reason why this is unlikely as of now, and this could change, like a revolution in America potentially, or a coup or something like that. The reason why it's unlikely right now is because right now Americans are too comfortable to do anything about it. They're too comfortable and too fearful of the government to do anything about it. Yes, Americans are well armed. Yes, Americans have an ability to cause a lot of problems due to its gun culture, at least for the government. But right now, the armed forces, the police, the intelligence agencies are extremely powerful, and too powerful for such an issue to go on for long. Also, the press is heavily in support of the state. All the mainstream media, although media is fragmenting, which I will talk about in another video, which could cause an issue, media fragmentation and everyone's in their own world. That could cause another issue, especially if, conspiracy theories rise up, or there's a belief that the government is illegitimate due to certain things. But as of now, the American people are too cucked, to be honest, to do a revolution. They just found out that their leadership, defends and protects pedophiles, and they do nothing about it. So if they're not willing to do anything about that, revolt against an illegitimate leadership that protects pedophiles, then what's the point? Like, when will they revolt? Will they revolt when their rights are stripped away? Probably not. Maybe when they're so hungry that they feel like there's no other alternative, maybe that might happen. But I doubt anyone's going to let it devolve to that situation unless the people in power are that incompetent, which I don't doubt. So, but, it's not weakness or capability that prevents the American government from losing legitimacy or like losing power, but in actuality, what happens is that it's a combination of loss of legitimacy as well as desperation. And I don't think that people are desperate enough, and I don't think we're anywhere close to a revolution, at least in the next 5 years. 10 years, maybe. But my prediction is that it's a revolution is a low probability event, maybe 20%, depending on what happens and depending on the next government or a continuation of this government's ability to tackle the debt crisis, tackle inflation, or a budding food crisis that's happening. If it doesn't navigate these next issues anytime soon, there could be blood on the streets eventually. And I am not excited for that because, everyone's a target. Anyone who is rich enough to take care of themselves and take care of other people, or people who have responsibility, or people who are close to centers of power, are in big danger. So it's important to navigate this situation wisely, especially if you're a policymaker or someone who is making decisions in Washington.